Thank you very much, Senator Greening, your chairman, Chairman Guest, who was a longtime friend and a classmate of mine from a few years ago when we were in law school together. For Senator Bartlett, who is unable to be with us here today, but there can be no meeting of Democrats in this state without recognizing his presence and spirit, if not in fact. Your distinguished National Committee man, Alex Miller, who, with your National Committee woman, who have been so kind and generous to me today and adjusting the schedules of this convention, as all of you have been, to meet the problems of scheduling of myself and others as well. To your state chairman, who has been extremely hospitable in his welcome, your vice chairman, to all of those who have been greeted me out at the airport and have been with us today, to our representatives of our distinguished other presidential candidates, Congressman Edwards, who I've known for a long time and who I see here and I know has spoken effectively for Senator McCarthy, and whose record in the Congress is outstanding, to old friend Gene Foley, who's representing the Vice President. None of us are quite sure what he's representing. But I think all of us have a pretty good idea, and I was saying when we shared a caucus earlier, I used to see Gene Foley in the mountains and hills and dales of West Virginia representing the then Senator Humphrey at that time, and it's always a pleasure to see him again. To all of you, let me say what a pleasure it is for me to be in the United States Senate with a combination of Senator Greening and Senator Bartlett. Those of us in Massachusetts feel a special sense of affection for Senator Greening, who spent many years of his earlier life as one of the outstanding editors of one of our great newspapers in that state, was concerned about the issues involving mankind at that time, many years ago, and has continued his concern and his deep sense of feeling about the well-being and the welfare of his fellow citizens. This state is extremely well represented, and I can say what a pleasure it is for me as a senator from a maritime state to be able to be counseled by these two great senators, Senator Greening and Bob Bartlett, who have been interested in the problems of the sea coast, and the problems of ports, who have concerned themselves about conservation, the great salmon breeding grounds of our nation, I think, have made extraordinary contributions not only to their state but to our nation. And when Senator Greening stands on the Senate floor and speaks about the interests of this state, he speaks not only for Alaska and not just for the Democratic Party, he speaks for all Americans. And all Americans listen. And it's a pleasure to be with him again today. Senator Robert was scheduled to be here in Sitka today to address a great convention of Democrats in a great state. He was prepared to speak to you of the challenges we face together as one nation, one country in the uncertain world in which we live. He would have been proud to be in the company of the men and women who are truly America's new frontiersmen. People who have pitted themselves against the elements, as did our forebears in New England, and people whose courage and independence is looked upon by all Americans as symbolic of all of our ideals. But there are times for all things. There is a time to talk to Democrats and a time to talk to all men regardless of party. There is a time to recount our past and recall those in our party who have built a nation. And there are times to focus on the present, to assure a future more secure. There is a time for meeting with friends to discuss the political challenges of the coming months, challenges created by man and to be won or lost by man. And there are times to accept for the moment what God has given to us or taken from us. This Sunday in Sitka, is a time to meet in the full dignity of our sorrow. But this is a day of mourning for Martin Luther King, for Washington, for Detroit, for Memphis, and Chicago. And it should also be a day of mourning in Sitka. For as the earthquakes of Alaska were felt in Boston, so the impact of the shot in Tennessee must be felt in this city. Events occur that alter the course of our nation. Events that must be recognized for what they tell us of ourselves, where we stand in reality, rather than in our fondest dreams. Such an event, a tragic affair, occurred in Memphis, Tennessee, Thursday evening, when Martin Luther King was shot and killed. And the tragedy of that occurrence is still upon us, and may remain with us for many days to come. So today, I will not make a political speech. Today, I wish to share with you my personal thoughts in a time of sorrow and in a time of fear. As we meet today, we should know that 10,000 federal troops have been stationed in your nation's capital. They surround the White House. They surround Capitol Hill. The people of Washington, D.C. have been ordered off the streets from 4 o'clock in the afternoon until 6:30 in the morning. Firemen who are attempting to fight the blazes in the District of Columbia have taken gunfire. And last night there were fires in 70 Washington stores. There is a red glow over the city this afternoon. The city of Chicago is also under a curfew. National Guard troops have been called in by the governor. I am not stressing these things to be an alarmist or to strike fear into your hearts. I tell you these things because they are occurring. And until we recognize things for what they are, until we recognize how serious the situation confronts our nation, we will never be able to meet the crises or forge realistic or meaningful solutions. A man of vision has made the observation that the most exciting, the most dramatic, the most promising development for all mankind in the second 1,000 years since the birth of Christ is the United States of America. Never before in the history of the world have a people developed a form of government and a set of ideals so close to the most intimate dreams and wishes of all men than have we in America. If any man ever doubted the good intentions of his fellow man, if any man ever wondered whether institutions of government could be responsive to human needs, if any man ever yearned for a way of life that satisfied his desires for human freedom and dignity, he could look to America. This was our image. In truth, this was America as we knew it, as we grew in it, and as we have taught our children. Yet one feels today that we have been so content to live with what we were convinced our country was, we have refused to take sight of what in the decade of the 60s our country has become. If we are willing to face it, all of the ugly signs are there to see. It seems that we have lost hold of our communities. It seems as though our country is pulling apart into separate societies who do not know one from another. Separate societies of the rich and the poor, of the black and the white, of the old and the young, where whites have jobs and Negroes have unemployment, where the middle class lives in suburbs and the poor are left in the ghettos, where one group of Americans looks upon another group of Americans with growing mistrust and even dread. And where, unfortunately, not because we lack the goodwill, but because we lack the faith in ourselves, our response often is to bolt the door, to hire more police, and stay away as far as we can from the centers of violence. In this decade, we have lived through periods of more hate and violence than perhaps any other time in the history of our country. It is a decade the likes of which we must never, and we can never live through again. But as we approach the 70s, we must keep in mind the events of the 60s, or we will be compelled, as it has been said, to relive the past we have forgotten. The death of Martin Luther King was not the work of the white society, it was the work of a sad mind filled with hate. The death of Medgar Evers, of Emmett Till, the 4 little girls in the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, of the Reverend James Reed of my own state of Massachusetts, of Viola Luizzi of Detroit, of Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman. None of these tragic occurrences were the result of any one group or of another. They all suffered at the hands of individuals who somehow had the notion, in their sickness, that their violent actions would be tolerated. To the extent that all of us are to blame, black and white together, we are to blame for the apathy that gave the haters the license to hunt people in America. And those who now loot and steal, those who claim they have the right to honor the memory of a man of peace, a man who stood for everything that was nonviolent, by burning our cities, by breaking into the places of business, and terrorizing our neighborhoods, they too are suffering from an illness that, if allowed to go unchecked, will further drag down this great nation. Their actions cannot be tolerated. They will not be tolerated, for they do not mourn a great leader. They mock him. What has become of our land? What disease has affected us as a people? How many good men must we give? Common man in the streets, a holder of the Nobel Peace Prize, and even a President of the United States, before we finally face the fact that the weakness of our society is the weakness in ourselves, within each and every one of us who are complacent, who are doing well, who realize the comforts of material gain, and who are, above all else, apathetic. Where is the moral strength within us? The qualities of character that we attribute in stories to our children of the American heroes that have gone before us. I, for one, do not feel that we are any less than our forebears. I, for one, do not feel that there is anyone within this room who has less courage, less conviction, or is any less dedicated to the American dream than generations past. But I do feel that in a few short years we have let events master us rather than we them. I do feel in our great history we have fallen into a lapse. We have refused, each and every one of us, to exercise the talents and character bred into us. And as a result, in a land that was created on the Judeo-Christian ideals of love and brotherhood, we have let the haters take the lead. And we are paying that price today, as we have paid for it many days and nights in this difficult decade. It is not until we recognize that hundreds of years of oppression must be accommodated, not by the least we can give, but by the utmost we can give, will these nights of sadness and fear end. It is not the bigot among us who has brought us to where we are, for men of goodwill ignore him. It is not the racist among us who has brought our society so low, for it is easy to see and discount him. We are where we are because all of us are passing through life with our own personal blinders on. We favor civil rights bills and feel a warm glow in our hearts when we hear the eloquence of a Martin Luther King. We cluck our tongues over the agitators in the streets and call them outside troublemakers or ne'er-do-wells. In essence, we are all very decent men and women of good faith. And we are all doing very busy with our careers and with our families, all too busy with our own concerns to fight injustice, to fight poverty, and to fight ill will in the immediate world around us. As a United States Senator, my message to you today is very simple. We only delude and mislead ourselves if we feel that we lift a personal burden from our shoulder by passing pieces of legislation, important as that is, if we feel legislation can be our only response to our fellow men who are deprived. Beyond that, I would say that no matter how the most difficult questions of Vietnam is solved, no matter how we meet the future challenges in the Middle East, no matter how strong the controls we develop over the horror of atomic weapons, and no matter how we face the domestic problems of health for the poor, education for our young, and decent housing and better roads for the more distant parts of America, no matter how well we do these things, they will only be the epitaph of a great nation that could not bind its own wounds within itself, and as a result, lost itself. If laws do not meet the need, and they don't, if speeches will not meet the need, and they won't, if marches and demonstrations won't meet the need, and they won't, where are we to turn? We can only turn to ourselves. We're in a moment of national crisis such as we are experiencing now. That is all that is left. Men in public life, to be true to themselves, must be more candid with whomever they speak, regardless of the political consequences. Our ministers, our priests, our rabbis must be more relevant in social sermons with their flocks, regardless of how many unhappy people they will make. Our educational institutions and our teachers must see to it that America's young are not shielded from the realities of their society, but are educated to meet the challenges that will soon be theirs. And in our homes, as parents, we have our own responsibilities to wipe away cynicism and to introduce the understanding that we wish to see future generations exercise so they will not suffer as their mothers and fathers have suffered. Last Thursday evening, I left my office in Washington to attend a midnight church service, not in the church of my faith, but in the church of the faith of Dr. Martin Luther King. During that service, the pulpit was given up by the men of the cloth, and those in attendance were asked to speak their views and to console each other. Black and white alike rose to the occasion. Some were eloquent, others were harsh. I found myself recalling that day before the Lincoln Memorial in 1963, when Martin Luther King stood before a crowd of 250,000 Americans, proclaimed that he had a dream. He had a dream in which freedom would ring out for all Americans from the coast of Maine to Alaska, to the mountains, the east to the mountains of the west. He will never see that dream. The moment that we realize that his dream is truly our dream, and the moment we work as individuals to make it come true, we will be one again, we will be strong again, we will proceed as a nation to the fulfillment of our destiny, to the fulfillment of the statement that this nation is the most important occurrence of the second 1,000 years. These are the thoughts I wanted to share with you today, and I thank you for letting me come back to Alaska.